America was not built from wood, not really. Wood built the frontier. Wood built cabins. Wood built early towns. But wood did not build modern America. Modern America was built from something stronger, something harder, something capable of carrying impossible loads, spanning impossible distances, and reaching impossible heights. A material that could hold up skyscrapers, cross continents on rails, cross oceans in ships, support factories, power industries, win wars, and transform a young republic into an industrial giant. That material was steel. Today it surrounds us, in bridges, in buildings, in vehicles, in machinery, in power plants, in pipelines, in countless structures most people never notice. Its presence is so common that it has become almost invisible. Yet few materials have shaped history more profoundly. Few materials have transformed a nation more completely. The story of steel is not merely the story of metal. It is the story of industry, of invention, of ambition, of wealth, of labor, of cities, of empires, and of America itself. This is the story of steel, the metal that built America. Act 1. Before steel. For most of human history, iron was king. It was strong, reliable, useful. Entire civilizations depended upon it. Farmers used iron tools. Blacksmiths forged iron products. Armies carried iron weapons. The Iron Age transformed humanity. Yet iron had limitations. It could bend, crack, wear down. Its strength had boundaries. As societies grew more complex, those limitations became increasingly apparent. The Industrial Revolution demanded better materials. Factories required stronger machinery. Railroads required stronger rails. Cities required stronger structures. Human ambition was beginning to exceed the capabilities of traditional iron. The world needed something better, something stronger, something that could support an age of machines. Act 2. The secret inside iron. Steel and iron are closely related. In fact, steel begins as iron. Yet a small difference changes everything. Carbon. Just the right amount of carbon transforms ordinary iron into something extraordinary, stronger, harder, more durable, more versatile. For centuries, people understood pieces of this process, but producing high-quality steel consistently remained difficult and expensive, very expensive. Steel existed, but only in limited quantities. It was too costly to become the foundation of an industrial civilization. The challenge was not invention. The challenge was production. How could humanity make enormous quantities of steel? How could it make steel affordable? How could it make steel available on a scale large enough to transform society? The answer would arrive in the 19th century, and it would change the world. Act 3. The Bessemer Revolution. In the 1850s, an English inventor named Henry Bessemer introduced a process that transformed steel production. The idea was deceptively simple. Force air through molten iron. Remove impurities. Reduce costs. Increase speed. The effects were revolutionary. What had once been expensive became affordable. What had once been limited became abundant. Steel production accelerated dramatically. Factories expanded. Industries took notice. Investors paid attention. Engineers saw possibilities everywhere. The age of steel had begun, and America was about to embrace it with extraordinary enthusiasm. Act 4. A young nation with big ambitions. By the late 19th century, the United States was growing rapidly. Railroads expanded westward. Cities multiplied. Factory appeared. Immigration surged. The nation possessed enormous natural resources: coal, iron ore, land, waterways, and perhaps most importantly, ambition. America was hungry for growth, hungry for expansion, hungry for industry. Steel offered exactly what that growth required: a material capable of turning vision into reality, a material capable of supporting a nation determined to become an industrial power. The timing was perfect. America was ready, and steel was ready. Act 5. The railroads demand more. Few industries embraced steel faster than the railroads. The railroad network was expanding at breathtaking speed. Tracks stretched across thousands of miles. Locomotives hauled increasing loads. Traffic intensified. The nation depended upon rail transportation. Yet iron rails wore out quickly. Heavy trains damaged them. Maintenance costs increased. Accidents occurred. Railroad companies needed something stronger. Steel provided the solution. Steel rails lasted longer, handled heavier loads, improved reliability, reduced costs. The advantages were undeniable. As railroads adopted steel, demand exploded, and with that demand came opportunity. An opportunity that would create one of the most influential industrial empires in American history. Act 6. The Rise of Pittsburgh. Few cities became more closely associated with steel than Pittsburgh. Located near valuable resources and major transportation routes, the city possessed critical advantages. Coal was nearby. Rivers connected markets. Industry flourished. Smoke filled the skies. Blast furnaces glowed through the night. Factories expanded across the region. Workers arrived from around the world. Pittsburgh became a symbol of industrial America, a city powered by fire, by labor, by steel. Its mills produced enormous quantities of metal. Its influence extended far beyond Pennsylvania. What happened in Pittsburgh affected railroads, construction, manufacturing, and eventually the entire nation. The city was becoming the heart of America's steel industry. Act 7. Andrew Carnegie. Among the many individuals drawn to the steel business, one would become legendary. Andrew Carnegie, born in Scotland, raised in modest circumstances, immigrated to the United States as a child. He entered a nation filled with opportunity, and he intended to seize it. Carnegie understood something many others did not. Steel was not merely another industry. It was the future. Railroads needed steel. Factories needed steel. Cities needed steel. America needed steel. He invested aggressively, expanded relentlessly, and built one of the most powerful industrial enterprises in history. His mills became models of efficiency. His operations grew larger, his influence expanded. Fortunes accumulated. The Steel Age was creating enormous wealth, and Carnegie stood at its center. Act 8. The Furnaces of a New America. As the 19th century approached its end, steel production surged. The numbers were astonishing. Year after year, output increased. Factories expanded, demand accelerated. America's industrial capacity grew rapidly. The transformation could be seen everywhere: railroads, bridges, factories, machinery, construction projects. Steel was becoming the skeleton of modern America, invisible to many, essential to all. The nation was entering a new era, an era in which steel would shape landscapes, build cities, create fortunes, and transform the United States into an industrial giant. But steel's greatest impact had only begun, because soon it would rise not across the land, but into the sky. Act 9. The King of Steel. By the late 19th century, Andrew Carnegie had become one of the most powerful industrialists in America. His rise reflected a larger transformation taking place across the nation. America was becoming an industrial powerhouse. Factories multiplied, railroads expanded, cities grew, and steel stood at the center of it all. Carnegie's genius was not simply producing steel, it was producing steel efficiently. He embraced new technologies, improved processes, reduced costs, expanded capacity. Every improvement increased output. Every improvement strengthened his position. His mills operated on a scale that earlier generations could scarcely imagine. Raw materials entered one end. Finished steel emerged from the other. The system was relentless. The furnaces never seemed to sleep. Day and night steel flowed, and with every ton produced, Carnegie's empire grew larger. Yet enormous wealth often creates enormous tensions, and beneath the success of the steel industry, conflict was brewing. Act 10. The Men of the Mills. Steel was not created by machines alone. Behind every furnace stood workers, thousands upon thousands of workers, immigrants, laborers, families seeking opportunity, men willing to endure conditions few today would accept. Steelmaking was dangerous, the heat was intense, the hours were long, accidents were common. The work demanded constant attention. A moment of carelessness could result in injury or death. The furnaces consumed more than coal and iron ore. They consumed human effort, human endurance, human sacrifice. For many workers, steel offered opportunity, a path toward stability, a chance to build a better future. But it also came at a cost, and as industrial fortunes expanded, questions emerged. Who truly benefited from America's industrial growth, the owners or the workers whose labor made it possible? Act 11. Homestead. In 1892, those tensions erupted. At Carnegie Steel's Homestead plant near Pittsburgh, one of the most famous labor conflicts in American history unfolded. Workers and management collided over wages, control, and the future of organized labor. The confrontation escalated. Private security forces arrived. Violence followed. The nation watched. The strike became more than a local dispute. It became a symbol of the struggle between labor and capital during America's industrial age. The outcome strengthened the position of management, but the broader debate did not disappear. The questions raised at Homestead would echo throughout the 20th century. Who should share in industrial prosperity? How should workers be treated? What responsibilities did corporations possess? Steel was building America, but it was also forcing Americans to confront difficult questions about power and fairness. Act 12. The first billion-dollar corporation. At the dawn of the 20th century, another remarkable event occurred. The steel industry entered a new phase. Finance and industry merged on an unprecedented scale. The architect of that transformation was J.P. Morgan. Morgan understood the immense value of steel. He also understood that consolidation could create something extraordinary. In 1901, he purchased Carnegie Steel and combined it with other companies. The result was United States Steel, the first billion-dollar corporation in American history. The number itself seemed almost unbelievable, $1 billion, at a time when such wealth appeared unimaginable. United States Steel became a symbol of modern corporate power. Its size reflected the scale of America's industrial ambitions. The nation was no longer merely growing. It was becoming an economic giant, and steel was one of the foundations of that transformation. Act 13. The Bridges of a Nation. As steel production expanded, engineers gained access to a material capable of solving old problems. For centuries, rivers had limited movement. Crossings were difficult. Transportation suffered. Economic activity slowed. Steel changed that. Its strength enabled larger bridges, longer spans, more ambitious designs. Structures once considered impossible became achievable. Among the most famous examples was the Brooklyn Bridge. Completed in 1883, it represented a triumph of engineering and imagination. Steel cables helped support a structure unlike anything that had come before. The bridge became more than infrastructure. It became a symbol of what steel made possible. And it would not be the last. Across America, steel bridges connected communities, expanded commerce, and shrank distances. The nation became more connected because steel made connection easier. Act 14. The Skyline Revolution. For thousands of years, cities faced a limitation: gravity. Buildings could only rise so high before their own weight became a problem. Stone and brick imposed constraints. Walls had to become thicker, heavier, less practical. The result was a natural limit on height. Steel shattered that limit. Its strength allowed architects and engineers to think differently. Instead of relying on thick masonry walls, buildings could use steel skeletons, frames capable of supporting enormous loads. The consequences were revolutionary. Cities began growing upward, not outward. Upward, the skyscraper was born. Act 15. Chicago reaches for the sky. No city embraced the skyscraper faster than Chicago. After the Great Chicago Fire of 1871, rebuilding created opportunities for innovation. Architects experimented. Engineers pushed boundaries. Steel frames made new designs possible. Buildings climbed higher and higher. Each structure challenged assumptions about what cities could become. Chicago became a laboratory for the future, a place where steel transformed architecture, a place where the modern skyline began taking shape. The city's influence spread across the nation. What started in Chicago would soon reshape urban landscapes everywhere. Act 16. New York ascends. If Chicago pioneered the skyscraper, New York perfected it. The city possessed unique advantages: limited space, growing populations, intense economic activity. Building upward made sense. Steel provided the means. The skyline evolved dramatically. Office towers appeared. Commercial districts expanded. Architectural competition intensified. Each new building sought to surpass the last. Height became a symbol of ambition, of prestige, of economic power. The race skyward accelerated, and steel stood behind every victory. Without steel, the modern skyline would be impossible. Without steel, New York would look entirely different. Without steel, the image of the modern American city might never have emerged. Act 17. the metal of modernity. By the early 20th century, steel had become far more than an industrial material. It had become a symbol of progress, of technology, of modernity itself. It appeared everywhere. Railroads, bridges, factories, ships, machinery, skyscrapers. The material seemed limitless in its possibilities. America's rise as an industrial power increasingly mirrored the rise of steel. The two stories became intertwined. To understand one was to understand the other, and both were accelerating toward an era of even greater transformation, because the 20th century would place demands on steel, unlike anything seen before. Demands created by war, by automobiles, by massive infrastructure projects, and by a nation becoming one of the most powerful in the world. Act 18, the Century of Steel. As the new century unfolded, America entered a period of unprecedented growth. Industry expanded, cities flourished, innovation accelerated. The country was becoming wealthier, larger, more influential. Steel enabled much of that progress. Yet the greatest tests of the industry still lay ahead. Soon, steel would become more than a building material, more than an industrial product. It would become a strategic resource, a weapon of national power, a foundation of military strength, and one of the most important materials in the largest conflicts humanity had ever known. The Age of Steel was entering its most dramatic chapter. Act 19, the Metal of War. The 20th century arrived with extraordinary optimism. Technology advanced rapidly. Industry expanded. Cities grew. Many believed the future would be defined by progress and prosperity. Then came war. In 1914, Europe descended into a conflict unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. The First World War introduced a new kind of warfare: industrial warfare. Mass production met mass destruction. Factories became as important as battlefields. Production became as important as strategy, and steel became one of the most important materials in the conflict. Steel formed artillery. Steel formed warships. Steel formed helmets. Steel formed machine guns. Steel formed the railroads that carried armies and supplies. The war revealed a new reality. Modern power depended upon industrial capacity, and industrial capacity depended upon steel. The metal that had built railroads and skyscrapers was now helping shape the outcome of global conflict. Act 20, the Machine Age. When the war ended, America entered a new era. Factories expanded. Consumer demand increased. Technology spread into everyday life. The machine age accelerated, and steel remained at its center. Factories required steel machinery. Industrial equipment required steel components. Manufacturing required steel tools. The material became embedded in nearly every aspect of production. The modern economy increasingly depended upon machines, and machines increasingly depended upon steel. The relationship was powerful. Every new factory increased demand. Every new innovation created opportunities. The nation was becoming more industrialized than ever before, and steel was helping make it possible. Act 21. Henry Ford's Vision. Few inventions transformed American life more dramatically than the automobile, and few individuals influenced that transformation more than Henry Ford. Ford did not invent the automobile. His achievement was making it accessible, affordable, available to ordinary people. The moving assembly line revolutionized manufacturing. Efficiency soared. Production accelerated. Costs declined. Automobile ownership expanded rapidly, and every automobile required steel. Steel frames, steel engines, steel wheels, steel components. The automobile revolution became a steel revolution as well. As millions of vehicles rolled off assembly lines, demand for steel surged. The relationship between the two industries became inseparable. Cars changed America. Steel helped make the change possible. Act 22. Building a modern nation. The 1920s brought extraordinary growth. Economic activity expanded. Construction accelerated. Cities evolved. Infrastructure improved. Across the country, steel supported the transformation. Factories multiplied. Warehouses expanded. Commercial buildings appeared. Transportation networks improved. The nation seemed to be moving forward at remarkable speed. Steel provided the framework, often unseen, often overlooked, yet essential. Like the skeleton beneath a body, steel supported structures that defined modern life. Its influence extended everywhere, from industrial districts to residential neighborhoods, from transportation systems to manufacturing centers. The material had become part of the nation's foundation. Act 23. The Empire State Building. Among the most dramatic demonstrations of steel's potential was the rise of the skyscraper. And few skyscrapers captured the imagination like the Empire State Building. Construction began during difficult economic times. Yet the project embodied confidence, ambition, determination. Steel workers assembled the framework at astonishing speed. The structure rose floor after floor, higher and higher above New York City. When completed in 1931, it became the tallest building in the world. A symbol of engineering achievement, a symbol of American ambition, and a monument to the possibilities of steel. Without steel, such height would have been impossible. Without steel, the modern skyline could never have existed. Act 24. The Great Depression. Then the boom ended. The stock market crashed. Economic activity collapsed. Businesses failed. Unemployment surged. The Great Depression became one of the most difficult periods in American history. The steel industry suffered alongside the nation. Demand declined. Production slowed. Factories reduced operations. Workers lost jobs. Entire communities struggled. Industrial cities felt the pain acutely. The furnaces that once roared day and night often fell silent. Yet, even during hardship, steel remained essential. The nation still required infrastructure, still required industry, still required hope. And eventually, recovery efforts would place steel at the center of rebuilding. Act 25. Building through crisis. As the government launched large public works programs, construction projects spread across the country. Bridges, dams, public buildings, transportation infrastructure. These projects provided employment, stimulated economic activity, and left lasting marks on the American landscape. Steel played a central role. It enabled larger projects, stronger structures, more ambitious designs. The material once again became a tool of national transformation. Not through private expansion alone, but through collective effort. The country was investing in itself, and steel helped turn those investments into reality. Act 26, the Golden Gate Bridge. Among the most iconic achievements of the era was the Golden Gate Bridge. Stretching across the entrance to San Francisco Bay, the project presented enormous challenges: powerful currents, strong winds, difficult conditions. Yet engineers persisted. Steel made the bridge possible. Its towers rose above the water. Its cables carried tremendous loads. Its span connected communities previously separated by geography. When completed in 1937, the bridge became one of the most recognizable structures in the world, a masterpiece of engineering, a triumph of design, and a celebration of what steel could achieve. Act 27, the approaching storm. By the late 1930s, recovery was underway. Factories regained momentum. Production increased. Industrial capacity expanded. Yet beyond America's shores, tensions were rising. Europe moved toward another war, a larger war, a more destructive war. The demands placed upon industry would soon reach unprecedented levels. Governments understood what modern conflict required: ships, aircraft, vehicles, weapons, infrastructure. All depended upon industrial production, and industrial production depended upon steel. The furnaces would soon roar again, not for prosperity, not for skyscrapers, not for bridges, but for survival. Act 28, the arsenal awakens. As war spread across the globe, America prepared. Factories expanded, production lines accelerated, industrial capacity mobilized. The nation's enormous manufacturing base began transforming itself. Consumer industries shifted toward military production. Automobile plants prepared to build tanks. Factories prepared to build aircraft. Shipyards prepared to launch fleets. At the center of it all stood steel. The metal that had built cities would now help defend nations. The material that had supported growth would now support victory. And in the years ahead, America's steel industry would face the greatest challenge in its history: the arsenal of democracy. In December 1941, the United States entered the Second World War. The conflict would become the largest and most destructive war in human history. Victory would require courage, strategy, sacrifice, but it would also require production, massive production, the ability to manufacture weapons, vehicles, ships, aircraft, and supplies on a scale never before attempted. America possessed a unique advantage: its industrial base, its factories, its resources, its workers. And at the center of that industrial system stood steel. President Franklin Roosevelt described the nation as the arsenal of democracy. It was an accurate description. Factories worked around the clock. Blast furnaces glowed day and night. Production surged to astonishing levels. The steel industry became one of the engines driving the Allied war effort. The metal that had built America was now helping defend the free world. Act 30. The ships that crossed the oceans. Wars are often remembered through battles, yet battles depend upon logistics. Supplies must move, fuel must move, food must move, troops must move. Across vast oceans, Allied success depended upon ships, and those ships required steel. One of the most remarkable achievements of the war was the Liberty Ship program. These cargo vessels were designed for speed of construction. Shipyards developed new methods. Workers assembled ships at unprecedented rates. What once required months could sometimes be accomplished in weeks. Thousands of vessels entered service. They carried ammunition, vehicles, food, medical supplies, and countless other necessities. The Liberty ships became floating symbols of industrial power, and beneath every deck, within every frame, was steel. Act 31. The Factory of Victory. The war transformed American industry. Automobile plants stopped producing civilian cars. Instead, they manufactured tanks, military vehicles, aircraft components, weapons. The scale was extraordinary. Factories adapted rapidly. Workers learned new skills. Production targets increased constantly. Steel flowed through every part of the system. Tanks required steel armor. Warships required steel hulls. Weapons required steel components. Military infrastructure required steel construction. The demands seemed endless, yet production continued rising. America became a manufacturing powerhouse, unlike any the world had ever seen. The industrial miracle was not merely a triumph of machinery. It was a triumph of organization, of labor, of resources, and of steel. Act 32. Pittsburgh at War. No city better represented wartime steel production than Pittsburgh. The city had long been synonymous with the industry. Now it became one of the great centers of wartime manufacturing. The furnaces operated continuously. The skies glowed at night. Workers poured into mills. Production targets grew increasingly ambitious. Every ton mattered. Every shipment mattered. Every hour mattered. The city's output reached battlefields thousands of miles away. The connection was direct. Steel produced in Pennsylvania became ships in the Atlantic, tanks in Europe, weapons in the Pacific. The industrial heart of America was helping shape the outcome of a global war. Act 33. Victory. When the war finally ended in 1945, the world looked different. Entire nations lay in ruins. Cities had been devastated. Economies shattered. Infrastructure destroyed. The United States emerged in a unique position. Its industrial capacity remained intact. Its factories remained productive. Its steel industry remained powerful. The nation had helped win the war. Now it would help build the peace. And once again, steel would play a central role. Act 34. The post-war boom. The decades following World War II became one of the most prosperous periods in American history. Economic growth accelerated. Consumer demand expanded. Construction flourished. Manufacturing surged. Millions of veterans returned home. Families grew. Communities expanded. The demand for housing exploded. Suburbs spread outward. Entire neighborhoods appeared where fields had once stood. Steel supported the transformation. Homes required steel components. Appliances required steel. Factories required steel. Schools required steel. Hospitals required steel. The material seemed to be everywhere because it was. Act 35. The age of the automobile. The automobile became one of the defining symbols of post-war America. Ownership expanded dramatically. Highways multiplied. Travel increased. Mobility reshaped daily life. Every car represented a small miracle of manufacturing. And steel remained one of its most important ingredients. Millions upon millions of vehicles rolled off assembly lines, each requiring enormous quantities of metal. The automobile industry and the steel industry became deeply connected. One fueled demand for the other. Together, they helped drive economic growth across the nation. The steel mills thrived, the factories thrived. America's industrial economy reached extraordinary heights. Act 36. The Interstate Era. In 1956, construction began on the interstate highway system. It would become one of the largest infrastructure projects in history. Thousands of miles of roads, thousands of bridges, countless overpasses, a transportation network spanning an entire continent. Steel was everywhere within the project. Reinforcement, structural supports, bridges, guardrails, construction equipment. The interstate reshaped America, and steel helped make that transformation possible. Once again, the material demonstrated its versatility. It could build cities, connect regions, support commerce, and enable growth. Act 37. The peak of industrial America. By the 1950s and 1960s, American steel stood near the height of its influence. Production reached enormous levels. Employment remained strong. Industrial cities flourished. The nation produced vast quantities of metal. The world looked to America as a manufacturing leader. Steel symbolized strength, prosperity, progress. The great mills seemed permanent. The industrial cities seemed secure. Many assumed the dominance would last forever, but history rarely stands still. Technologies evolve. Economies change. Competition emerges. And beyond the horizon, new challenges were beginning to appear. Challenges that would reshape the industry just as dramatically as its rise had reshaped America. Act 38. The Turning Point. For nearly a century, steel had helped define American power. It built railroads, skyscrapers, factories, bridges, ships, highways, entire cities. Its story mirrored the story of the nation itself: growth, expansion, innovation, success. Yet every age eventually confronts change. And the steel industry was approaching one of the most significant transitions in its history. The next chapter would bring globalization, foreign competition, technological transformation, economic uncertainty, and the rise of a region that would become known by a haunting name: the Rust Belt. The furnaces still burned, but the world around them was changing, and the age of unquestioned industrial dominance was drawing to a close. Act 39. The world changes. For decades after the Second World War, American steel appeared unstoppable. The mills were productive. The workforce was enormous. Demand remained strong. Industrial cities prospered. The United States stood at the center of the global economy. Yet success often creates assumptions, and one assumption increasingly took hold: that America's industrial dominance would continue indefinitely. History had other plans. As the post-war world recovered, other nations rebuilt their industries. Factories reopened. New facilities emerged. Technologies improved. Competitors entered global markets. The international economy was becoming more competitive, and steel would be among the first industries to feel the effects. Act 40. The Challenge from Abroad. Japan's post-war recovery was one of the most remarkable economic transformations of the 20th century. Modern steel plants appeared. Efficient production methods spread. New technologies improved quality and reduced costs. Other nations followed similar paths. Europe rebuilt. Industrial capacity expanded. Competition intensified. For American steel companies, the challenge was significant. Many domestic mills had been built decades earlier. Some equipment was aging. Operating costs increased. Global competitors often possessed newer facilities and different economic advantages. The market was changing, and industries that had once dominated domestic production now faced competitors from around the world. The era of unquestioned American industrial supremacy was ending. Act 41. The mini-mill revolution. At the same time, innovation emerged from an unexpected direction. For generations, steel production had been dominated by massive integrated mills, gigantic facilities, enormous workforces, complex operations. These plants defined the industry. Then came the mini-mill, smaller, more flexible, often more efficient. Instead of relying entirely on traditional blast furnace methods, many mini-mills used electric arc furnaces and recycled scrap steel. The concept altered the economics of production. Costs could be reduced. Operations could adapt more quickly. New competitors entered the industry. The shift was profound. The future of steel would not necessarily resemble its past. The industry was evolving, and not everyone would benefit equally from the transition. Act 42. The furnaces grow quiet. Throughout much of the 20th century, industrial cities had depended upon steel. The mills provided jobs, supported businesses, funded communities, defined identities. Then closures began. Not everywhere, not all at once, but enough to change lives. Factories reduced operations. Production shifted. Employment declined. Communities that had once thrived faced uncertainty. For many workers, the impact was deeply personal. Generations had labored in the mills. Parents, children, grandchildren. Entire family histories were connected to steel. Now those traditions faced disruption. The consequences spread far beyond factory gates. Local economies struggled. Population declined. Neighborhoods changed. The industrial landscape of America was being transformed. Act 43. The Rust Belt. The term emerged gradually. The Rust Belt, a phrase that captured both physical reality and economic change. Across portions of the Midwest and Northeast, industrial decline became increasingly visible. Factories closed. Facilities stood empty. Communities searched for new directions. The imagery was powerful. Rusting structures, silent mills, abandoned industrial sites. Yet the story was more complicated than decline alone. Many communities adapted. Businesses evolved. New industries emerged. Universities expanded. Technology sectors grew. Healthcare expanded. The transformation was difficult, but it was also part of a broader shift in the American economy. The nation was changing, and the regions that had once forged its industrial strength were changing as well. Act 44. Pittsburgh reinvents itself. Few places symbolized steel more completely than Pittsburgh. For generations, the city's identity was inseparable from its mills, its rivers, its furnaces, its workers. Then came transition. The steel industry contracted. Employment declined. Economic uncertainty grew. Many feared the city's best years had passed. Yet Pittsburgh chose a different path. Universities became engines of innovation. Technology companies arrived. Healthcare expanded. Research institutions flourished. The city reinvented itself. Its industrial heritage remained important, but it no longer defined every aspect of its future. Pittsburgh's story became one of adaptation, a reminder that communities can evolve even after profound economic change. Act 45, the Global Steel Age. As the 20th century approached its end, steel production became increasingly global. Raw materials crossed oceans. Finished products traveled continents. Markets interconnected. Supply chains expanded. The center of gravity within the steel industry shifted. Production increased dramatically in parts of Asia. China, in particular, experienced extraordinary industrial growth. Cities expanded. Infrastructure projects multiplied. Factories surged. Demand for steel reached historic levels. The scale was immense. Entire skylines appeared within decades. High-speed rail networks expanded. Bridges multiplied. Ports grew. Industrial output soared. The story of steel was no longer primarily American, it was global. The material that had helped build America was now helping build the 21st century world. Act 46. The metal of modern infrastructure. Despite economic shifts, steel never disappeared. Far from it, modern civilization continued relying upon it. Bridges still required steel. Railroads still required steel. Power plants still required steel. Factories still required steel. Construction still required steel. The material remained indispensable. Few alternatives matched its combination of strength, versatility, availability, and cost-effectiveness. The world around it changed, yet steel remained, sometimes less visible than before, but no less important. Act 47. Recycling a nation. One of steel's greatest advantages is its ability to be recycled, again, and again, and again. Unlike many materials, steel can return to production without losing its essential properties. Old bridges become new beams. Retired automobiles become new products. Scrap becomes opportunity. The process conserves resources, reduces waste, and extends the life of one of civilization's most important materials. In many ways, steel embodies continuity. The past helping create the future, a century-old structure contributing to tomorrow's construction. The cycle continues. Act 48. The metal that endured. Many technologies have come and gone. Many materials have risen and faded. Steel has endured. It survived economic transformations, wars, depressions, globalization, technological revolutions, and changing markets. Its role evolved, its industry adapted, its geography shifted, yet its importance remained. Civilization still depends upon strength, and steel still provides it. Act 49. The modern skyline. Every era leaves behind monuments. The Egyptians built pyramids. The Romans built aqueducts. Medieval Europe built cathedrals. Modern America built skylines. Across the nation, towers rise above city streets. Structures of glass and steel reaching toward the clouds. Some stand hundreds of feet high. Others exceed 1,000. Each one depends upon an idea first realized more than a century ago. The steel frame, hidden behind walls, invisible to most observers, yet absolutely essential. Without steel, the modern skyline would collapse under its own weight. Without steel, cities like New York, Chicago, Houston, Philadelphia, and countless others would look fundamentally different. The material that once carried railroads across the continent now carries cities into the sky. Act 50. The steel beneath the surface. One of steel's greatest achievements is that it often disappears, not physically, but from notice. People admire bridges, not the steel inside them. They admire buildings, not the beams supporting them. They use highways without thinking about reinforcement. They turn on electricity without considering transmission towers. Steel has become part of civilization's hidden infrastructure, quietly supporting daily life, quietly enabling modern society. Its success has made it almost invisible. Yet, if steel suddenly vanished, modern civilization would face immediate crisis. Transportation would suffer, construction would halt, manufacturing would slow, energy systems would struggle. The material's importance often becomes apparent only when imagining its absence. Act 51. The energy economy. Modern energy systems depend heavily upon steel. Power plants require steel. Pipelines require steel. Transmission infrastructure requires steel. Wind turbines require steel. Hydroelectric facilities require steel. Even many renewable energy technologies rely upon vast quantities of steel. The material's versatility allows it to serve multiple energy systems simultaneously. It supported the age of coal, the age of oil, the age of natural gas, and now it supports emerging energy technologies as well. The story of energy and the story of steel have become deeply intertwined. Each has helped shape the development of modern civilization. Act 52. The metal of mobility. Transportation remains one of steel's most important domains. Automobiles have changed dramatically since the days of Henry Ford, yet steel remains central to their construction. Railroads still rely upon steel rails. Ships still depend upon steel structures. Infrastructure supporting transportation still depends upon steel. The material continues enabling movement on an enormous scale. Every day, millions of Americans travel across systems supported by steel. Many never notice it. Yet nearly every journey depends upon it. The metal that once helped unite a growing nation continues helping keep it connected. Act 53. Steel and National Security. Throughout American history, steel has carried strategic importance. The lesson became obvious during the World Wars. Industrial capacity matters. Manufacturing matters. Materials matter. Nations capable of producing critical resources possess important advantages. Steel remains among those resources. Military vehicles require it. Naval vessels require it. Infrastructure requires it. Industrial resilience requires it. The exact nature of warfare may change. Technology may evolve. But the relationship between industrial capability and national strength endures, and steel remains part of that equation. Act 54. Reaching beyond Earth. The story of steel extends beyond roads, beyond cities, beyond continents, into space. The space age introduced extraordinary new materials, aluminum alloys, titanium, composite structures. Yet steel continued playing important roles in infrastructure, manufacturing, launch facilities, and countless supporting systems. The rockets may attract attention. The spacecraft may capture imagination. But the industrial systems making those achievements possible still rely heavily upon steel. The journey to the stars begins on Earth, and Earth remains a world built largely from steel. Act 55. The Green Challenge. Every generation inherits new responsibilities. The 21st century faces questions previous generations rarely considered. How can industry reduce emissions? How can manufacturing become more sustainable? How can economic growth coexist with environmental stewardship? The steel industry has become part of that conversation. Researchers explore cleaner production methods. Companies invest in new technologies. Engineers search for ways to reduce environmental impact. The challenge is substantial. Steel remains essential. Demand remains enormous. Yet the methods used to produce it continue evolving. The industry that transformed itself repeatedly throughout history now confronts another transformation, perhaps one of its most important. Act 56, The Future of Manufacturing. Predictions about the future often focus on software, artificial intelligence, robotics, digital systems. And those technologies are important. Yet, even the most advanced digital economy depends upon physical reality. Data centers require construction. Factories require machinery. Infrastructure requires materials. The physical world remains indispensable, and steel remains one of its foundations. The future may be increasingly digital, but it will still require bridges, buildings, transportation systems, energy infrastructure, and manufacturing. The future will still require steel. Act 57. A material unlike any other. Few materials have shaped American history as profoundly as steel. Wood helped settle the frontier. Coal-powered industrialization. Oil-fueled mobility. Electricity transformed daily life. Yet steel connected many of those stories together. It carried railroads, supported factories, strengthened bridges, enabled skyscrapers, protected nations, expanded industries, and transformed landscapes. Again and again, steel appeared. Wherever America attempted something ambitious, it became the material of possibility, the material of expansion, the material of modernity. Final act. The metal that built America. History is often told through people. Presidents, inventors, entrepreneurs, generals, visionaries. Their contributions matter. But history is also shaped by materials, the resources that make ambitions possible, the foundations beneath achievements, the unseen forces supporting visible progress. Steel was one of those forces. It helped connect a continent through railroads. It helped raise cities into the sky. It helped build bridges across impossible distances. It helped create automobiles, factories, ships, and infrastructure. It helped win wars, support prosperity, and transform a young nation into an industrial superpower. Its influence reached nearly every corner of American life, from Pittsburgh's blast furnaces, to Chicago's skyscrapers, to New York's skyline, to California's bridges, to factories, highways, and neighborhoods across the nation. Steel was there, sometimes visible, often hidden, always essential. The story of steel is ultimately the story of strength. Not merely physical strength, but the strength to build, to innovate, to adapt, to endure. Again and again, America confronted challenges, expansion, industrialization, depression, war, global competition, technological change, and through each chapter, steel played a role. The material evolved, the industry evolved, the nation evolved, yet the connection remained. Because beneath the bridges, beneath the railroads, beneath the factories, beneath the skyscrapers, and beneath much of the modern world itself, lies a metal forged in fire, shaped by human ingenuity, and woven into the story of a nation. Steel was never merely a product. It was infrastructure, industry, opportunity, power, and possibility. The metal that carried America from the age of steam into the modern world. The metal that built America.